Well, welcome to our monthly CMDA meeting. It is Tuesday, October 3rd. My name is Singh Pallet. I'm the president of CMDA. We have a wonderful agenda today, including elections and re-elections for board members. So I'm going to let Travis Neill moderate today's meeting. And thank you, Travis, for putting all this together.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining. So today we have limited time, so I'm going to kind of jump right in, but we're going to very briefly hear from the candidates for, we actually have some members at large positions, two folks that are incumbents, so they're just renewing, and then there's 3 new people, which is fantastic. And then Dr. Rebecca Jackson is running for vice president. After those introductions, we're going to hear from Jenny Albertson and Chad Fear on CHCA and CDPHE updates, and then we'll go into our innovations presentations, and I will go through each one as we go. So let's start with Rebecca, and just have you give us a little brief introduction or a little blurb on yourself if you'd like, as you're running for vice president.
Can't hear me because my voice is apparently too soft to be picked up on a computer microphone. So is it okay? Okay. All right. Well, like he said, I'm Rebecca Jackson. I'm a geriatrician and a CMD up here in Fort Collins. I've been doing post-acute and long-term care pretty much ever since fellowship. So it's almost a decade now, not to age myself completely, but I was first introduced to AMDA and CMDA by Dr. Birmingham, who's on today, and he was my mentor back in residency. And I remember going to my first conference and being like, these were my people, you know? So this has really been my professional home ever since I've found it. And I really value the education, the advocacy, and all the support that CMDA does for our state. So they were tremendous for me during COVID, especially. So I was on the board this last year as a member at large and thought I'd step up and try to support Singh and the rest of the team as the vice president. I have big shoes to fill for Allison, and I can't promise good jokes. That's not happening. But I really appreciate the opportunity. So that's about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. And yes, we could use some fresh jokes for vice president, I think. So we have 4 board members at large, and these are really positions designed to kind of get a little more involved, maybe help coordinate things like some committees, and but really just, I think, get more engaged. And so we have Dr. Rai, who is an existing member at large. And Dr. Rai, you want to say a brief blurb about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Travis. My second year here with CMDA. First year was super helpful. Learned a lot about kind of what goes on behind the scenes with folks like Travis and Singh and all the others that have been around for a while, and all the work that goes into everything that's done. I'm a wound care physician here locally. I've been doing long-term care for several years now, back to 2014, 2015. So look forward to hopefully another year supporting all of CMDA.
Thank you. And then Alicia Smith, who's also an existing board member at large, and she's running for renewal. Alicia?
Know that I see Alicia's name on my Zoom. Maybe we can go on to the next candidate.
Yeah, let's do Val. So Val Shade, new person running for a board member at large. And Val, why don't you just give us a brief introduction?
Sure. Yep, Val Shade. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I was out in a community clinic after I graduated in 2019. Been a nurse since 2012, and so fairly new to the game. Previous to that, I was an engineer for 13 years, so just got a little bit different direction there. And yeah, so this kind of came about because I went to the last conference, the CMDA, and afterward I went to Allison and said, hey, here's all these great ideas for different opportunities we could get for these things, you know, different presentations. And she said, you know what? have we got a job for you? So yeah, so here I am.
Thank you very much. And Kathryn Albanese, also new nurse practitioner running for a member at large position. Kathryn?
Hi guys, so I'm Kate Albanese. I am a family nurse practitioner. I've been working with Optum going on about 6 years. I've attended a couple of the CMDA conferences, and this year Singh and Allison kind of, mentioned getting involved and considering being on the board, and I'd really like to just do something more outside of work and get more involved with some colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you. And then Dr. David Shepard, also running for member at large position.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Shepard. I'm a medical director and an internal medicine physician. I've got several facilities here in Colorado Springs, and I'm medical director, and I also have 3 facilities out east towards Kansas and the Plains. And yeah, I'd love the opportunity to be more involved with CMDA. I think it's a good opportunity for me to help out a great organization and also grow and learn.
Thank you. And yeah, and I would just say, because Allison and I joined the CMD board, or ran for it quite a few years ago now, and it's just a real good way in an environment that is somewhat disjointed. We are out on our own a lot, and to feel connected and a part of the community. So really appreciate everybody running for those positions and help getting more engaged. All right, so we're going to have a couple of updates. We'll start with Jenny Albertson with CHCA.
All right, I will share my screen. I've already sent my slides to Singh, and I'll make this quick. I've added additional information, like I often do, that will allow you to look up references and so forth from the slides when you receive them, should you decide to dig a little deeper, because I know we only have a very brief time together. First off, I'm sure all of you have reviewed the latest update to the up-to-date definition. This is going to impact our NHSN reporting at the facilities. So as your infection prevention nurses are inputting how many people are vaccinated, it will drop to 0 until they receive the absolutely updated version, unless you've been administering bivalent within the last 2 months. I know that we've already seen some good recommendations out for how to delay vaccination if there's been a recent infection. And so we're trying to spread that news as well, so that we can spread our efficacy of our vaccination. But do expect to see NHSN rates significantly drop. This is a public reporting measure. And so CMS will be adding this to the nursing home compare data, and it will appear that we have unvaccinated residents and staff in our communities until we get a chance to run these COVID clinics. It'll just essentially say that we are utterly unvaccinated. So NHSN will not penalize us for that, and survey will not either. But just as a quick reminder, we are still required, they built this directly into the Board of Health rules, to host vaccine clinics within 60 days of CDC recommendations. And so now we are in that clock ticking period, and CDPHE is aware that there are issues with some of our pharmacies being unable to get us vaccine in quantity, and some glitches around insurance billing and so forth. But if you do run into those, if your communities are running into those issues, please let me know, because I've already heads up other pharmacy providers that can pinch hit, as well as CDPHE, who's willing to step in and assist. We do still have to track vaccination status despite the lack of a mandate, and no exemptions are required. I get that question often. If we're supposed to track it, I think people directly correlate that it's somehow mandated that we have an exemption. And of course, we do go through that process with flu. So it is not required for COVID, but you do have to track all staff, all residents, all volunteers, contracted individuals, and so forth. So that remains in place. And then I have heard frequently of people who have determined that they do not have an outbreak, but they've heard of one positive case within their community, whether a resident or a staff member, and all positive cases are reportable to public health. Just make sure your folks are doing that. And then you have your outbreak definition there. It's of course much more in-depth on the CDPHE website. Their mitigation guidance for nursing homes and assisted living is still posted. The outbreak definition is the same for both settings, and all of these reminders are for both settings. Quick little blurb here, because you probably don't pay attention to CMS putting out memos all the time quite as much as I do. We do contribute a very significant amount of money to the Civil Money Penalties Fund. I make it sound like it's a charitable donation. It really is a penalty. Every time we have jeopardy tags and other things that require us to pay fines. This goes into a giant set of coffers here in Colorado, and we have a board that is supposed to approve grants to spend that money back to the communities. They have utterly frozen this program. CMS is the administrator of the program. They froze it for quite some time in order to evaluate whether they would like to change it. Well, just so happens they drastically changed it. They have completely altered what we are able to use the grant funds for, and they have taken certain things off the table because they think they are funding these efforts in other ways. So they've dumped a chunk of money into workforce development, mental and behavioral health support through SAMHSA, and complex technology also is not something that they want to promote. So their general philosophy shift is that they want everybody to reach a basic standard of living in nursing homes, and this is no longer aimed at being an innovation grant. We actually titled our board an innovation grant in Colorado. So this is going to completely shift how we approach this process, and all the grants that were submitted now have to be resubmitted under the new rubric. Just a quick note, if you have not yet put in your 2 cents through the AHCA website, American Healthcare Association website, or directly to CMS about the proposed staffing mandate, this is our goal, is 10,000 unique comments. Write about what you know. And I have included a series of slides at the end of this presentation for your reference, describing all of the detail of the staffing mandate, should you wish to see the detail. And that is due November 6th. And then this is all that we have going on. It's getting pretty robust. I really hate that they make me put the brakes on in the holiday season. So I'm like working right up until November, and it'll start right again after the first of the year. So this is what we're offering. There will be an in-person training that I'm hosting in company with CDPHE and other surveyors, a workshop on abuse prevention on October 12th. So next week on the Western Slope in Grand Junction. So if you have communities out there, please let them know to join us. It's a lot of fun to do the road show and to have Chad as my partner. So there you have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad Fear with CDPHE for an update.
All right. Yeah, I always enjoy following Jenny because I can say ditto. Great information, Jenny. In addition to the things that Jenny shared with you, I just wanted the group to know that October 1st was the beginning of the new federal fiscal year, and right now we're business as usual due to government stopgap measures. We'll see what happens. If we can get a permanent budget approved, and if not, we'll keep moving along and probably do some state survey work until something can get approved. But for right now, we are business as usual. Again, Jenny had a lot of the kind of the hot news coming out of CMS, so I won't go back over that. But I would like the group to know. With the, our progress through the previous federal fiscal year, we have 27 facilities left to visit to do recertifications. So 27 facilities in the backlog. And I think that's been quite an accomplishment by our surveyors to be able to get that work done. We came out of the pandemic with 108 facilities. So nearly half of all facilities were overdue a recertification survey, and we've been able to whittle that down quite significantly. October 1st, we are also go live with some new timeframes for complaint and facility reported incident investigations for immediate jeopardy level types of concerns. We are going to be out in 3 business days for a non-immediate jeopardy situation with a high level. We're looking at an average of 15 business days, but no later than 18 business days. A medium level complaint, and we have to triage all of these based on the element or potential element for harm in the complaint. For a medium level complaint, we're looking at 45 calendar days, and anything lower than that, we're tracking and trending and able to go out at a later time. So that might sound somewhat similar to the timeframes that we had previously. The difference is now when we do get a call or an email, that time clock starts right when we receive that. Previously, we were able to start the clock when we felt like we had enough information to go out and do an investigation. So even though these timeframes are just a little bit longer than what we worked with previously, the timing for which we need to get out is actually shortened. So that's something we're working on internally to manage our bandwidth to be able to come out and do complaint inspections. Did want the group to know too, we ended the federal fiscal year with 17 immediate jeopardy situations, the previous federal fiscal year. And these were for serious concerns related to such things as pressure wounds, accident hazards, and major medication errors. And we've talked about this from time to time, but we discussed this most recently at the CHCA annual conference, and just wanted to bring to this group too that CMS places an emphasis of focus. Their attention is focused on certain areas each year, but I see that there's going to be a lot of attention being placed on unnecessary psychotropic medications, the emergency preparedness plan, and overall in the CWAPI process being fundamental to the facility at self-identifying and developing strategies to correct any deficient practice that they may observe for themselves. So those, that's going to be a very important part of the facility strategy moving forward. So I did want to take this opportunity to kind of underline and emphasis again for the group that these are some things to give particular attention to in your facilities. That's what I have for y'all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate that. So we're going to go right into our talks on innovations in long-term care. So essentially the idea here was to request with the community anything that people are doing that are a little outside the box, maybe something unique to long-term care. And one person that answered the call was Dr. Tim Rodgers. Tim is a internist working at Rocky Mountain Senior Care in Colorado. He has over 15 years of post-acute and long-term care experience. He's a multi-facility medical director. Currently, he's a medical director at Benton County Healthcare in Las Animas, Colorado, and a medical director and sees patients at Santa Fe Care Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Dr. Rodgers is going to talk to us about continuous glucose monitors in long-term care. So Tim, if you want to share your screen, you should be able to.
Thank you very much. I don't need to screen share just yet. So folks, continuous glucose monitoring is something that you can start doing tomorrow. Patients love it, nurses love it. It's something that keeps us at the forefront of diabetic care. So please think about what I'm going to tell you and get it started. Go ahead, Mr. Neill. You can screen share now.
You want to share your computer?
Okay, got it. I'm first going to give you a little video that talks about how to put the device on. Hold on one sec. This device is made by Abbott, and what's happening to me is these pictures keep getting in my way. Okay. So this is a patient putting on his sensor.
Product insert and a sensor applicator, which you will use to apply the sensor to the back of your upper arm. Before unscrewing the cap from the sensor applicator, follow these steps to prepare the back of the upper arm. Wash the back of your upper arm using a plain soap and water. Wipe dry with a clean towel.
I'm going to speed ahead a
Clean with an
little.
alcohol wipe, and then after you have finished preparing the back of your upper arm, you are ready to apply the sensor. The Freestyle Libre 3 sensor and applicator already come assembled for you. Simply unscrew the cap and set it aside. Do not put the cap back on, as it may damage the sensor. Place the sensor applicator over the prepared site on the back of your arm and push down firmly to apply the sensor to your body. The sensor should now be attached to your skin. Then make sure the sensor is secure by gently pressing down with your finger around the edge. It's that easy.
The Freestyle Libre 3 system makes it easy for me to.
And that's how you do it. It's very, very simple. Patients can do this themselves at home. Therefore, it's easy for our facilities to do it. These systems are made up of three components: the sensor, a small wire catheter that is inserted under the skin on your arm, a transmitter that attaches to the sensor, and a receiver. The receiver can either be an application on the patient's phone, or it can be a device that's the size of a regular glucometer, and it scans it. This measures your interstitial fluids glucose level. It's not a blood glucose. It can lag behind serum glucose a little. The 4 endocrinologists I have talked to about this say that this lag is nothing to be concerned about. There are ways to deal with it. The most common type relies on scanning the sensor to get the patient's current glucose. The other type is a sensor that continuously transmits interstitial glucose to a phone app or sensor. At this time, the patient's phone app can only scan their sensor, and the reader can only scan one patient's sensor. This will not work in a hospital or facility, but there are ways to overcome that also. The systems that I'm aware of that are out there are Abbott's Freestyle, one called Dexcom, another one called Medtronic Guardian 3, another one called Sensonic's Eversense. It's my belief that Abbott's is really more properly used in our settings, post-acute care. So the pros: it offers alerts. One benefit of all real-time CGM systems is having audible alarms if sugars are too high or too low. This allows for adjustment that could lessen the impact of that high or low sugar. They can transmit continuously with real-time CGM devices. Data is constantly pushed to a receiver or smartphone. Can you imagine PCC? You know, eventually the patient's real values are going to be in PCC. The data can be shared. These systems allow glucose results to be automatically uploaded to a professional program resident on the provider's computer. LibreView gives a consistent set of clear, intuitive reports that make it easier and faster to discover patterns. CGM eliminates finger sticks. The reader that Abbott uses can do a finger stick also, but this is the big bonus. Patients love it, nurses love it. Nurses spend way less time on doing finger sticks because they don't have to do them. And could be a savings of time, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes easily per finger stick. And our patients have scarred finger sticks, so they love these. The other really important point is that the patient is much more aware of their glucose. All of a sudden, they take their phone or the reader, they scan their arm, and bang, there's their glucose. The cons: to use the alarm and alert features, you have to program your settings, but that can be done. And that that type of program really only applies to outpatient settings. In my facilities, at this time, we keep the alarms off. Eventually, as usage is more ubiquitous and nurses are more used to it, the alarms will be very, very important. Sometimes alerts can be alarm and tiresome. Devices can be expensive. However, in the last 4 months, Medicare has improved what they require for these sensors, and they are much easier to get. The big one, of course, in the nursing home is frustration. One more thing. Thanks, Dr. Rodgers. Now we have to do da, 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 da. So I did this for a patient, the nurse's patient loving it. I said to the director of nurses, aren't you loving it? She goes, yeah, it works great. But we forgot to tell you about the other patient whose lab we lost. So unfortunately, sometimes staff are encumbered by other problems. Cautions. You do not want the patient to be using something called emergent-C or airborne. They should be on vitamin C levels no higher than 500 milligrams. In the past, these substances were a problem: Tylenol, hydroxyurea, tetracycline, antibiotics, and aspirin. They are okay now. It cannot be used on pregnant patients. And other times that it does not give reliable readings is in cases of dehydration, shock, hyperosmolar states, dialysis. If the patient is going to have an X-ray or CAT scan, it needs to be taken off. Once the patient or the nurse applies the new sensor, you have to wait up to 12 hours before the readings are accurate. Here are billing codes. Code 95250 pays somewhere between $145 and $290. This is when the staff puts on, could you hold on one second?
I think that was more than a second, but as we wait for Dr. Rodgers to get back, thank you for the couple of questions in the chat box. We will get to them shortly.
So these three are the codes: 95250 if your facility puts the device on and sets everything up, and two other codes, one to be used if the patient does it himself, another one to be used if you are simply reading values. These are diagnosis codes. They should all work. The ones highlighted, albeit very simple, I have seen work in the past. So E10.9 is known to work. I know that it works. E1165, E11.9. I'm 99% certain the rest of these diagnoses will work also. This is an idea of the order that you would write in PCC or submit into PCC. It's very simple, very straightforward. And last but not least, I urge you all to try this. It's coming. I'm sure lots of you have seen patients come from the hospital with sensors. You want to be able to use those sensors. It's worth it. Questions?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rodgers. That was great. So some questions in the chat were, I mean, really around coverage. Any tips or, trying to get this paid for? And I guess from your own experience, do you have multiple patients using it, or are there, the facility ever pay for that?
Okay.
Is there any opportunities there?
Yep. Now, Medicare does a good job covering it. Medicaid does a good job covering it. There can be 20% after the 80% that might need to be covered. At one of my facilities, I believe in this so much, I told them I will pay that 20% monthly for a year. It's like $25, I think. It's really not much because I think it's worth it. At the end of that year, I'm guessing the patient's going to demand that they keep using it. So in general, they're easier to get. Don't let that stop you. And don't give it to some office person at the facility or give it to the DON. It's the kind of thing you have to do yourself because there might be bumps that other people will get thrown off. Anything else?
Yeah, so another question is kind of about any issues with really the data and how that is used in a facility. So is the data hard to download or hard to, do you put it in the chart? Just kind of how it works with maybe PCC?
So at the very least, the sugar gets put into the chart by the nurse. At the very most, there's for the Libre, there's a program you can use that all of your patients' data will be in. That program is easy to download. It gives you reports. It tells you what's happening. It gives you ways to predict what's going to happen. Very helpful for treating patients long-term. And those reports can certainly be scanned into PCC, but it really is just you that need them to make the decision. Not hard to do. Takes a little practice, that's all.
And then there's a question. I have a resident who uses the Dexcom G6 at a facility. It is very user-friendly and needs no scanning. It continuously records the blood sugar. So just
nice
another endorsement.
Dexcom is nice. Dexcom is nice. It's just way more expensive than Libre.
Dr. Gahm said, since insulin is dropping to the back of the line in regards to improved clinical outcomes in type 2 diabetics, is this a good option entering the market? Is this a good option entering the market about 10 years too late? And then let's see, do the studies support improved outcomes with long-term care patients?
Dr. Rodgers, did you want to comment on that?
He just went mute.
Looks like it. Is anyone aware of any studies using continuous glucose monitoring in long-term care patients? I don't believe I am, so.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any studies in any patients showing for clinical outcomes.
Okay, well, any other questions you can put in the chat box, or you can send us an email for Dr. Rodgers, particularly since, he's got some, actual experience implementing this in a facility. We are going to move on to Dr. Raj Rai. He's going to present on advanced wound care in long-term care. Dr. Rai is the owner and medical director of the wound care at ProHealth One, and also the medical director of wound care at Post-Acute Medical Hospital. He's been working in long-term care for almost 10 years. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Rai.
Thanks, Travis. So I can just share a screen from here, correct? Yeah.
Would be able to, yep.
Yeah. All righty. Just wanted to thank Travis and Dr. Pallett for inviting me to join and share this presentation. I was kind of struggling with an interesting topic that I thought would be relevant and short, and also keep it informative. So looking at different advanced wound care in the long-term care setting, there hasn't been a lot that's changed over many, many years in wound care, but there have been some attempts in the last few years to try to make things a little bit more almost like you're in a clinical setting or in a hospital setting. And I know there are some
Raj?
Yeah.
I don't know if you might be able to change which screen you're sharing. We're looking at the note screen. It's a little harder to see your slide.
Gotcha. Give me 1 second. Is that better?
It is bigger. Yeah.
Let's see here. Any better there?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I wanted to come up with a topic. Is that okay?
Yeah, looks good. Thank you.
And at the same time, make it informative for everybody. There's so many changes that happen in wound care, but a lot of them don't happen at the long-term care level. And so the struggle that we all have is, even just from Dr. Rodgers' presentation, try to keep up with current science and current modalities. So what I chose was something along those lines that's been coming around for several years now, but really has not been seen very often in the long-term care setting. And so before I get into that, I'll define specifically what advanced wound therapies actually are. They are essentially defined as novel principles or technologies that are supported by comparative evidence. And what I mean by that is taking modalities that are scientifically supported, of course, and then that show a comparative improvement versus current standards of care. And so studies have been done in looking at various modalities and how they are compared to current standards of care, if they're actually better. And then of course you have to define your clinical goals as you're going through that. And then the FDA decides, okay, well, these are better, these may be approved for because they see a clinical significance compared to what's currently being done. And so extrapolating from there, what I will focus on today is the use of placental products. Some of you may or may have not heard of some of the increased use of placental products in wound care. So I want to give you a little bit of some background on it. So the quick outline for today is going over the history of placental products, and then also their clinical significance, some of the unique qualities of placental products, and then the benefits and limitations that exist with using these products, particularly in our setting, So going back in history, we kind of associate placental products, I think I'd say over the last 10 years, so much has been discovered over that time, but amnion and amniotic products have been used for a little over a century. And so the first use was a skin transplant back in 1910 or so at Johns Hopkins. And then in the 40s and 50s, we had some ophthalmic uses, and then also used in hematologic cases where bone marrow transplants were beginning to be utilized. And then in the late 90s, and then I don't want to get political about this talk at all, but late 90s, there was a ban on the research in stem cells. And then back in 2009, there was a ban the ban then was lifted about 10 years later. And then from there, sort of began the current age of use of amniotic tissue for what we're talking about today. So clinically speaking, as I mentioned, so many uses have been discovered over the last 10 years or so, whether that be related to skin, which is obviously what I'm focusing on today, and then also orthopedic uses, ophthalmic uses, just a ton of different utilizations for those placental products, whether it be the amnion or the chorion, stem cells, and so on. So there's a ton of different applications that have been discovered. So we'll focus on obviously on the skin and on wound healing, since that's primarily what I do. So wound healing, you may or may not know, is really just a race against time. You have a wound that develops, and over that time, it's a race against time. And that race against time is you want to heal it, and you also want to try to get there as quickly as you can. So you're trying to avoid infection because you've suddenly lost that initial barrier, the skin, and then in some more complicated cases, you've lost other protective structures as well. And so wound care can be even more complicated when you add in the fact that some of them become very, very complex. I mentioned the loss of some of those protective structures. And the big challenges come when you are dealing with hard to heal wounds, those that are complex, and they present a significant clinical challenge because you're also dealing sometimes with patient comorbidities and conditions that are difficult to treat. So what happens, not to get too far into the science, is that chronic wounds get stuck in the inflammatory phase of wound healing. We may remember there are some people say 4 different phases of wound healing, but that inflammatory phase is the one that's most significant when you're trying to heal a wound that's been stuck there for a long time. So you have to figure out a way to get it out of that inflammatory phase. So if I were looking at making an ideal product for dealing with wound care, some of the features that I would think would be very helpful would be something that would help in a clean wound bed to provide an extracellular matrix for tissue repair, something that also has some anti-inflammatory properties, a product that can also stimulate cell migration or facilitate cell migration and then promote regeneration, and also decrease the amount of scar tissue that forms, because that can also lead to other problems. That's a big challenge. So if you're looking at placental tissue as a whole, where does this come into play? So obviously, we all know what placenta is, developing during pregnancy, and then often discarded after birth as medical waste. And then placental tissue can then be sourced from healthcare facilities with consent from the patient. And that's obviously very important. But you get to that point and then you wonder to yourself, okay, I've got a placenta, and let's say your company got approved for it. How is it actually prepared? So several companies have come up with their own methodology, and surprisingly, it's not very complicated to clean up placental tissue. It is a simple, not simple, but it's not as exhaustive of a process as you would think it would be. So once you obtain the material, it's washed, goes through a few rinses, some antibiotics, another rinse, and then essentially you come up with your final product, which is really important from a viability standpoint. So what changed over the last few years is researchers essentially came up with, how are we going to make this a viable product? Noting, of course, that there is some scientific and clinical therapeutic use to actually having these products. So it's not, just a random therapy that was discovered. It does have a lot of clinical significance. But how do you then take it from, the actual state of getting it cleaned and doing those things, and actually being able to use it for what it's worth, using some of those stem cells that are there to promote healing. And so they had to come up with some ways to simplify it, getting it from, let's say, the manufacturer down to the clinic or to the hospital. And so they realized that there were three things that were very important to make it more viable. One was to prepare it easily, which, as I mentioned in the last slide, the cleansing or the preparation part is actually pretty straightforward. It's not overly complicated. Then the storage and the transport were also challenges, right? So how do you get it from, a facility where it's been stored and frozen and so forth? So obviously there's a cryopreserved form of it. That was obviously very quickly discovered how to do that, but then how do you get it down to a level where you can share it with patients downstream? And so the dehydrated form is probably the most common one that I see used these days, but some places that have the capabilities to freeze at very cold temperatures maintain both products. So both methods do preserve the cellular components. The dehydrated form, as I mentioned, is a little bit more, I would say, applicable in the long-term care setting. Hospitals probably have a little bit more availability to freeze and do all sorts of other things with it. So, so once that was discovered, you start thinking about, okay, well, what makes it so unique and so important for wound healing, and so bountiful that you would want to use it. And so some of the key characteristics that placental tissue can support. It's very low immunogenic response. It's avascular when you get down to the layers that you're going to be using. And so it doesn't trigger a very big immune response. And then being a natural origin, it contains stem cells, a lot of cytokines. And those are obviously very important for tissue growth and inflammatory modulation. So summarily, what essentially happens is you're looking at this dehydrated amnion, chorion. Some have used one or the other, some have used both. And these are, when I say some, I mean the manufacturers have found special qualities in either one of them. And essentially, the placenta obviously contains those features like the stem cells that can differentiate into multiple germ layers. And then also the cytokines, the peptides, the anti-inflammatory agents that I mentioned earlier. So assisting in wound healing by cell migration then is very important into the healing tissue, which is one of the things that I mentioned is probably really important for healing in wound care if you're looking for an ideal product. So the slide that I have there is sort of a rundown of what's beneficial of from the placental product. And so 3 or 4 of the things I mentioned earlier: stem cells, low immunogenicity, analgesic activity has also been noted in some of the placental products, stimulating angiogenesis, decrease inflammation, reepithelialization. Also, they're all very, very important. And when you tie those in together for what wound healing is actually all about, you compare that to what traditional products can do. A lot of studies have been done, specifically with diabetic ulcers and venous leg ulcers, and then also looking at even pressure ulcers. And so how does the placental product actually come into play in improving outcomes? As I mentioned, those clinical guidelines are very important. And then when you compare them to other products that are out there in the market already, does it actually stack up to some of those other products and actually provide a benefit? So summarily speaking, once again, there are many, many benefits to using placental products, but then there are, of course, limitations. The first and foremost that comes to mind is the cost. The cost can be very, very extremely cost prohibitive. I was reading a paper a few weeks ago, or actually it was a newspaper article where a Medicare patient who obviously wasn't responsible for all the treatments had a product that was placed, and he saw the bill that came through, and it was almost $80,000. And when you look at some of these products, they're from the manufacturing side, there are hundreds of different manufacturers out there now. So the cost sometimes in some of these cases can be almost $1,000 per square centimeters, which is quite expensive, and it's quite a burden on the system, and can certainly lead to all sorts of nefarious things that we don't want to talk about too much. But the second limitation is that there's really a lack of sufficient data on therapeutic efficacy. Why that is you look at some of those companies, the hundreds of companies that I mentioned, they're all going to come up with their white papers. But when you look at a real meta-analysis and you really try to dig down into comparing products from different companies and looking at different centers, the cost for just running one of those studies can run well over $1 million just for a simple study. So there are some limitations that these manufacturers are dealing with, and there just haven't been enough studies in terms of sufficiently supporting its use on a regular basis. And then, of course, you have patient preferences, another limitation, in the ethical concerns, which once again, I don't really want to dig too far into, but there are some ethical issues with certain patients who don't want to use those modalities. And so what do we do? Should we start using it more widespread in long-term care? There are limitations from getting it from the manufacturer down to, let's say, a long-term care facility. I think I would go back on looking at this from kind of waiting and seeing. There is a financial burden. As it gets more widespread use, I think the overall cost will actually shrink some. But because there are also so many options out there, I think it's important, and some of the, even United has actually come out with an article reviewing a bunch of different papers and saying, okay, we think this one is a good one to use on diabetic wounds, as we think this is a good one to use here. And so many companies, many insurance companies are coming out with guidelines for what they think will actually be beneficial. And so I would say waiting for FDA approval on certain, for specific wounds would be wise. And then I'll just mention this because I mentioned it a few minutes ago. There was another study that I found really interesting that was surprising. There was a forward review from 2015 to 2019 looking at a bunch of talks that were done and a bunch of providers that were actually working for some of these companies as paid sponsors. And only about 16% actually disclosed that they were receiving payments on those. So that kind of makes you wonder and worry a little bit that this was, it's not being used in the right fashion. So I promise I have no financial disclosures, and that's the end of the topic.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. That was interesting. Looking through the chat, I don't see any questions. You can take yourself off mute if you do have a question, or you can put it into the chat.
I think Dr. Jurgens has her hand raised. Maybe not.
Sorry, wrong thing.
Oh, that's okay. I have a question. So if you do see if someone on the team is suggesting the use of one of these products, what questions would you ask to determine if it is appropriate or not?
Good question, Singh. Typically, the first thing you want to ask is, have you tried other modalities, right? I believe most for approval for certain products, you have to start out with the basics. Like one, is it better than what's out there? Is it going to lead to a quicker outcome? Because you do have to look at the cost benefit of it. So most studies will say, okay, have you tried 4 weeks of some of the standard conventional methods before actually looking at that, and have those methods actually failed? So that's probably the first thing that I would ask is, have you gone through a trial period of where you're trying everything else? We as a company at one point actually did try to use these, and running into a lot of hurdles, but we really just focused on a handful of patients that were complex wounds that had just not healed for a very long time. And so I think that's probably the first place, is you don't want to throw it on, all skin tears and all diabetic wounds, because you have to go through a certain process even for those. One, you have to make sure that if it's a diabetic wound, that they have good circulation. How's the compliance going to be? You certainly want to set them up for success. At the same time, you want to balance the fact that if this is a really good therapy, you want to be able to offer that to patients. And so I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but I would start with A, have you tried other modalities? And then B, is this a good candidate from a compliance standpoint, because you are putting an expensive product on a patient.
That's great. Thank you very much. So if anyone does have any other questions about this, you can email us, and we'll forward it on to Dr. Rai. I'm going to move to Dr. Greg Gahm. I feel like it's one of those should need no introduction, but he is a multi-facility medical director and chief medical officer for Vivage Beacon, and he is going to talk to us about once a year dosing of thyroid. Just kidding, once weekly. So, Dr. Gahm.
Hey, I'll make this quick. This is going to take about 3 minutes. This all started, my program director in medicine was a thyroidologist. That's all he did. Trained with Chip Ridgway, who I know Tim knows, and was one of the mentors for Mike McDermott. He taught us that, thyroid itself, if you give synthroid, levothyroid, the half-life in our seniors, in most folks, 8 to 10 days, seniors 9 to 11 days. So out of his practice of several thousand patients, I guess, that he also did on the side, he had nobody on daily thyroid. He used weekly thyroid for everyone. So I've been doing this for about 40 years, never collected much data on it. There is stuff in the literature about it. But a couple reasons to think about doing it is, one, most people thyroid just gets listed as one of 18 meds they're coming in on. And it's just give it every day, because that's how it comes from the hospital or from home. Yeah, she takes it every day. So it gets ordered Q-day. It gets given at 6 or 7 a.m. along with 10 other medications, and it just is not absorbed. So a few months later, you check a TSH and it's 9 or it's 12 or 25, and you just keep increasing the dose. So we don't give it correctly. You really have to give it without medications, without food, other times. And that's a lot easier to do once a week than it is once a day. Some I see orders for get people up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. just to give them their thyroid tablet. And that seems like cruel, unusual punishment. So for my folks, when I had a larger practice, and for those that I still mentor, we have Thyroid Thursdays. We give everybody their thyroid just on Thursday. And not that Thursday is any better than any other day, but there's typically not many agency nurses or fewer weekend nurses. And it's alliterative, so it's easier to remember. And we always give it either at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. because that's when you're least likely to be eating or drinking. There is lots of data that it doesn't pay to do a lot of research in this area, but there's lots of data that TSH doesn't suddenly go, drop out and then come back up over the course of the week. It's once you're on steady state, it stays pretty good. Anyway, it decreases nursing time. There's a small decrease in medical expense because you don't have to give pills, and it just decreases the poor pill burden for our patients. So I don't know. For me, I haven't used anything else now for 40 years. And I use it in my wife and my mother-in-law while she was alive, and my mother still. So that's it.
I have a question, Greg. Are there limitations to checking a TSH timing? Does that matter based on
No.
when the dose is given versus when you might check a TSH?
No, because it's so slow to respond. You're still going to wait 4 to 6 weeks after you make a change to check that TSH.
I mean in the same week that
No.
you're getting the thyroid dose, since it's given once a week, doesn't matter if you
No.
give it, or if you
Doesn't
check the
matter at
TSH
all.
the day after.
Won't matter at all. And dosing it, you just figure out, it depends. You typically, the rule is you figure out their weekly dose if you took it every day, and you just give all of that all at once. But oftentimes what I see is people have been getting higher and higher doses because their TSH was still elevated without thinking, oh yeah, they're getting it with breakfast or they're getting it with all those other pills. Typically, anybody that's on more than 100 micrograms a day, the higher you are over 100, the more you start getting concerned that they're really just not absorbing it. So I oftentimes start at a lower dose than what the 7 days would add up to. And no, if you give them their 1,000 micrograms on Monday and check a TSH on Wednesday, it's not going to matter.
Question in the chat box asking about do patients ever report feeling crummy after the higher doses? Any increase in fall risk or changing these to weekly?
No clinical changes. And in fact, in a few of the placebo-controlled trials, one of them's out of Brazil, patients couldn't tell which way they were getting it, daily or weekly. Can't tell them apart.
Stan asked, I agree with you concerning weekly dosing. Any concerns about standard of care issues, documenting it, putting something in the chart to justify the change?
You could do it if you wanted. For me, it is my standard of care. So it would be, no, I think you could always do that, but it certainly fits the drug's pharmacokinetics. And I often get asked when talking about, well, why didn't they approve it that way? It's because when levothyroid, synthroid has been around for so long that when it came to the FDA, they just said, yeah, we just give it every day. There wasn't a lot of thought given to it. No thought given to changing it because it's so cheap. It would cost a fortune to do the study to say, let's change it. And nobody wants to do that. So yeah, you can always put that in there if you want, or you can blame me. That's fine too.
All right. Well, thank you. Same thing, if you guys have any questions, you can email us. We just have a little over a minute. It's actually fine. In terms of my topic, I just wanted to briefly mention that I have done this at a couple facilities, and that is with respect to continuous cold therapy. And so the use of an ice machine. And so most commonly, these are given after a surgery, typically like knee surgeries. And the primary advantage of an ice machine is the extended exposure to cold, beyond just a few minutes that ice packs can provide. And there's definitely data out there to talk about how it treats pain and inflammation, and it can be used both for rehab patients in long-term care, but also for chronic pain patients. And the advantages that I've seen when this is implemented correctly, and the staff really gets behind it, is I've seen the ability to get off of or on lower doses of pain medication. It really becomes another tool that is pretty safe, and that avoids a lot of the pain medication out there. The primary obstacles using ice machine in long-term care are infection control, because the machines averaged maybe $150 to $200. They have a universal pad, but those pads are expensive. So if after you've paid for the machine, if you have to replace those pads or put on some kind of protective cover, that can become costly. So the way I've seen this done the best is using basically a disinfectant and doing just a thorough job of cleaning them between uses between patients. So that's one obstacle that needs to be paid attention to. And then, you know, the other one is, you know, really, you know, I think basically getting it cold enough, having ice on hand to, you know, fill it and keep it cold, because it really does need to be, you know, full of ice to get it cold enough to provide a lot of the benefit. But I just mentioned it because I really think it's another tool that, you know, if you get 2 machines for a facility, you know, they're usually willing to foot the bill for that. And, you know, gives options both for the rehab patients and the long-term care chronic pain patients as well. So that is it. We have reached 1 o'clock. I'm gonna, if anyone has questions about any of the talks, ice machine or otherwise, I'm just gonna ask you to email, or if you want to stay on, but we're gonna end it here at 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for participating, particularly for, you know, some of the newer folks that are both speaking as well as running for the board member at large, because we really appreciate your engagement and trying to get really the message out there, which is more education to the long-term care community. So thank you very much.